to the Jazz Notes podcast. I'm Ben Anderson.
I'm Chandler Holt.
We are recording this on March, is that right? March 17th? I can't remember what month it is. We are deep into the NBA season, less than a month left in the year, and a crazy week. It's been excited to talk about this last week for the Utah Jazz and what's coming up this upcoming week. As always, find us on Twitter at Ben's Hoops, see Holt Sports. You can also read us at, or find us at Blue Sky at those same handles, and then read us at KSLSports.com. So appreciate everybody who does this. You can also find this on YouTube. Like, you can find this on your podcast, but we also put this on YouTube. It's not video of us yet talking. I suspect that's coming.
Yes.
I think that's coming. I don't know when.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not up to me. But you can find it on YouTube, just the audio version. But soon, I'm sure it will have video with our beautiful faces. So, all right. As we always do, we like to get to the weekly news. We'll look at what happened for the week for the Utah Jazz. Look at the upcoming week. We will update you on the standings, which is the most critical standings update we have had. And everything I have said up to this point in the podcast this year has been wrong. And I'm prepared to answer to that. And then we'll wrap up with the mailbag. A lot of mailbag questions today. So excited for that.
All right, just one piece of weekly news for the Jazz. The NBA fined Utah $100,000 for sitting Markkanen. I believe the game they cited was against the Wizards, but then they also said, and also other recent games. Yeah. And this is via the player participation policy, which was put into effect in starting or after the 23-24 season?
2023-2024 is when it started.
Okay.
So for that year, the Nets last year got dinged in January and fined $100,000 for not playing all of their guys.
Yes. And then earlier this year, Atlanta got hit with it for sitting Trae Young, and then apparently also the NBA is investigating OKC and Philly right now. It only applies to star players, which they define as an all-star in the last 3 seasons.
Or all NBA.
So the Jazz can't, the Jazz can't get in trouble for sitting Walker or Jordan Clarkson or anyone else. It's just Markkanen. Starts with $100K, then $250K, then $1,250,000, and then an extra million every time after that.
At this point, it's money well spent.
Yes.
Right? Yep. If you land a top 3 pick or a top 4 pick, or top 5 now, it's looking like that's where the Jazz are trending. We'll get into that in a minute. It's $100,000 is nothing.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not spending it, but for Ryan Smith and the Jazz, you take this out of the business expense.
Yep.
You've got to you just rack it up as something you had to pay for. It's fine. It's a fine. It goes to charity, and or it goes to whatever, dispersed to whoever it gets dispersed to, but not a big deal. Yep. It's worth the money for the Jazz. And if you get Cooper Flag, you sell 30 season tickets and you've paid for it. Yeah. And you're going to sell 1,000 season tickets extra, 2,000 season tickets extra because you get that type of guy. So well worth it, and I applaud them doing it in all honesty, because that Wizards loss is looking enormous.
Yes.
And again, we'll talk about that coming up here momentarily. But we'll see. OKC absolutely should get dinged. They rested their entire team
6
against
players.
Portland. I think it was their entire starting lineup, including 2 All-Stars.
Yeah.
So in Shea and J-Dub. So they didn't play at all. Yeah, and Philly, I don't know if it'll apply to Philly. I guess it depends on how healthy you think. What would it be? Paul George,
and
Tyrese Maxey, and Joel have all made All-Star games. So I guess those 3 qualify. But we'll see how the Jazz approach it. The big story was actually, and we can talk about this. Well, let's look at the week that was, and we can address some of these issues as we go. Yeah.
So as we mentioned, huge week for the Jazz. They go 0-4. Started off with an expected, albeit closer than expected, loss to the Boston Celtics, 114-108. Followed that up with a 122-115 loss to the Grizzlies, and then a loss to Toronto, 126-118, and then last game a blowout, only blowout of the week to be noted, to Minnesota, 128-102.
All the losses the Jazz had, they're on a 9-game losing streak right now, but all the losses on that 5-game road trip they were on, they would fall behind by double digits. They'd claw back. It was like a 4-point game in the fourth quarter, and they lost close, which is not the most painful way to watch a basketball game, and ultimately serves the Jazz needs. You've got high leverage, high important possessions, late in games with young guys trying to figure out how to win, and you didn't hurt your lottery standings. In fact, you improved your lottery standings. So that was successful. And then that was a disaster yesterday. That was just not a very good game. Yeah. And they were down big early, clawed back a little bit in the second quarter, but got blown out to the point where none of the important players from Minnesota played the entire fourth quarter. But the most interesting game I thought was Toronto on Friday here in Salt Lake City, because the Jazz suited up Walker Kessler and didn't play him.
Yes.
Which was a new approach after getting fined. Lauri Markkanen didn't play the second half of the season, or the second half of the game, after having a really aggressive first half where he tried to get his points because he didn't want to hurt his average. And I'm sure the Jazz put out and said, hey, we want you to try some isolation situations. You haven't done it a lot this year. Let's see if you can figure that out over the last 10 or 15 games of the season, get more ISO opportunities. And then last night, they wanted to see Walker shoot a bunch of threes, and he took 6 threes. So You're starting to see some more of that. I'll be curious what else that looks like. You know, do you get Isaiah taking 10 threes in a game? Do you get Cody Williams taking 14 shots in a game? In general, I think you're going to see some of these moments where the Jazz are saying, like, let's test it out for a little bit. Yeah. We're not trying to win. Wins don't matter. Not everyone's going to be playing every game, so let's see what that looks like. But yeah, I think you're going to get more, probably including tonight, guys who are not listed on the injury report who suit up and simply don't play.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the NBA is going to approach that. I know the NBA doesn't like the lengthy injury report, so that maybe that's a way to get around it. I don't know if they're going to get hit with a second fine and get up to $250,000, but I think that would be hard to say, like, why can't the Jazz do that?
Yeah. And I was about to say, like, what are they doing wrong as long as they play Markkanen? You know?
Right, and Markkanen's the only guy who this counts for.
Yes.
It really is, because nobody else is an all-star. So Walker, as good as Walker is, and might be the Jazz's best player this year, or John Collins is, we'll see if he even comes back this year. I haven't heard anything on that other than he's going to be reevaluated in a couple of weeks. Lowry's the only guy you have to worry about. So play him in the first half or play him 6 minutes a quarter and get him at 24 minutes at the end of the night, and that's all he plays. So we'll see that approach. Don't count your chickens with the Utah Jazz just because they're not on the injury report. That's all I'll say.
All right. I believe last week we predicted 0-4, and the Jazz do go 0-4.
Yep.
Next week preview, all home games. I believe it's 6 in a row at home for the Jazz, starting tonight when they host the Chicago Bulls. On Wednesday, another big game, host the Wizards, and then Boston comes into town on Friday, and then host the Cleveland Cavaliers on Sunday.
1:30 game on Sunday, so kind of a fun midday game. These next two games are part of the biggest. I thought the Toronto game was huge. The Jazz found a way to lose that game. I suspect the same things that they did to lose the game on Friday will be deployed tonight and on Wednesday. And tonight being the second night of a back-to-back, you probably don't have to play Lowry.
Yeah.
I think you can get away with resting him. I haven't seen the injury report yet. Maybe I'll get a text even during the podcast, so we'll keep an eye on that. I'll keep my phone out. And then Wednesday you can not play Walker, or maybe you just win Wednesday and just say, whatever, you just win. You're not going to go totally win this the rest of the year. But that particularly would be a good game to lose. True. Because the Jazz, and we can get into the standings here, are below Washington, but only in the way that we have talked about being skeptical of. They have the same amount of wins.
Yes.
So don't worry about the losses. You would assume Washington's going to lose their next two games, except for the Jazz are one of their next two games. So if they win that, you put a full game between yourselves. And as I've said all year, I'm surprised the other teams have caught up, but the Jazz are going to finish with 18 or 19 wins. They're not getting to 20. And I look at the rest of the schedule, they're not getting to 20. But, does Washington accidentally get to 19 or 20 there? Maybe if they beat the Jazz.
Isn't Washington have won like 5 of their last 8 or something like that?
I think they're 5-3 in their last 8 games, and they're 6-5 in their last 11.
Yeah.
Jazz, this is the crazy stat to me because it's why I felt so confident talking about, like, the Jazz aren't in the fight for the number 1 seed. In fact, I think it was as recently as last week I said it was 3-4 for the Jazz and the Pelicans and 1-2 for the Hornets and the Jazz. Well, the Hornets get a couple of shocking wins as well. They're beating teams that they shouldn't be beating. And then, the Wizards catching the hottest streak that they've been on all year, including beating Denver on the road, is really wild. But the Jazz have made up 4.5 games in 17 days.
That's crazy.
Because the Jazz haven't won, and the Wizards have won 5 games in that stretch.
Yeah.
So that's why they have a nearly identical record, other than the Jazz have 2 more wins, or 2 more losses, excuse me.
So we can transition this. The Jazz are currently 15-53. 15th in the West, 30th overall, like we said. They have a 1-game difference from the Wizards. However, it's just because the Jazz have 2 more losses. They have the same amount of wins.
Right.
2.5 games separate the Jazz and the Hornets, and then 3 games between the Jazz and the Pelicans. Yes, the same amount of wins is scary because that means that they're basically, like, you expect them to lose these games, but that also means the Wizards have 2 more games on their schedule to potentially win.
Yes, to potentially win. And again, one of them is against the Jazz.
Yes.
Here's where it's really interesting for the Jazz beyond just the 2 games. And I went back and I wrote this yesterday if you want to go and find it. With 14 games left in the season, the Jazz have the 3rd most difficult schedule remaining. 9 teams that they play of their 14. 9 of the 14 are in the top 6.
Wow.
Like, are guaranteed playoff teams already who are going to continue to play and jockey for position, minus maybe the Thunder, the second to last game of the year.
Yeah.
But 9 of the remaining 14, and that doesn't include the Timberwolves, who make up the 10th team, that are tied with the Warriors, who are in the 6th seed. So basically 10 of the Jazz's final 14 games are against not just like the Sacramento Kings or teams that might have a chance to make the playoffs, like playoff teams that are legitimately in. On the flip side, The Wizards have the 5th easiest remaining schedule. Only 4 of their teams are against legit playoff teams. 4.
Wow. And
the Jazz have 9 and really 10 when you count the Timberwolves.
Yeah.
So more than double the amount. Yeah, the Wizards are going to win a couple of games here. The Wizards are absolutely going to jump out there and get a couple of victories. And if they continue to beat teams like Denver and Detroit on the road, who are in that conversation of top 6 teams, they could get to 20 easily. In fact, they could jump the Hornets and fall to 3, which would be crazy considering how bad they were to start the year. But you know what? They're doing what you should be doing, which is go play Alex Sarr a bunch against Nikola Jokic and see how he plays. And when Alex Sarr goes off for 34 and is awesome, it's like, yeah, that's why he was the number 2 overall pick, and you want to get that guy out and see what he can see what you can do with him. And he showed that against Denver. So a nice victory there for them and a great one for the Jazz.
Here's my hot, not so hot take for the rest of the year. If the Jazz lose to the Wizards on Wednesday, they are guaranteed to have the worst record in the NBA.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I really do. NBA's or ESPN's projected standings does have the Jazz finishing with the worst record in the NBA, and by a couple of games now. They really think they've got the Jazz finishing with 18.7 wins. They've got the Wizards finishing with 20.9. So a full 2-game difference.
Yeah.
And then a 3-game difference between them and the Hornets, and a 4-game difference between the Jazz and the Pelicans. So they've got the Jazz not just finishing with the worst record, but finishing with the worst record by a lot. Pretty unfathomable as of 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
But the Jazz have lost games at the right time, and now the crazy schedule that they have coming up, really it's these next 2 games, Chicago winnable, Washington winnable, and then you're on the road at the Hornets. You also get a home game against the Trailblazers. I think it's a home game. Other than that, other than those 4, like I just mentioned, it's a murderer's row. Those are the 4, and then the other 10 teams are legit playoff teams. So if you lose these next 2, you might only win 1 more game this year.
Yeah.
So this is it. I told you have to be a little shameless if you want to really get the top pick. And the value of having the top the worst record is you can't fall further than 5 in the standings. You can't be afraid to just rest guys and say like, yeah, I know the league doesn't like it. I know the league might fine us $100,000. If you want to get that type of player, you've got to lose a little bit of that. Well, pride's on the line here. Who cares? Go get Cooper Flagg and then talk about pride. Don't worry about it this year. This is not the team that you need to be worried about shame and pride with. So Jazz have done the hard work. They're doing the hard work right now. And honestly, if you're a Jazz fan, this is the best outcome for the team.
All right, Jazz fans, we just gave you some draft hope, but I'm about to bring you back down to reality a little bit. Since the lottery system began in 1985.
Yeah. Which, by the way, teams were tanking back then, which is why they started this. Tanking's been happening for a long time, NBA fans. This isn't a new phenomenon.
The team with the worst record in the NBA has gotten the number 1 pick 10 times in 40 years.
Okay.
They've fallen to 3rd or lower 25 times.
Yeah.
Since the NBA changed the lottery odds in 2019, which is when the 3 top teams got 14%, I believe.
Yeah.
The worst team has never won the top pick.
Okay.
And the Jazz have never had the number 1 overall pick.
Correct.
However, with all of that said, both the worst team getting the top pick since 2019 and the Jazz never having a number 1 overall pick, all of those streaks have to end at some point.
At some point. Do you happen to, and I'm sorry if you don't, have the teams that had the worst record overall and got the number 1 overall pick? Do you know who they are?
I do not.
I know one of them for sure, and I think there's 2 of them. One of them for sure was the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yes.
And they got LeBron James, and it was worth it.
Yeah.
I think one of the other ones was the Minnesota Timberwolves when they drafted Anthony Edwards.
Okay.
I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
If I am, we'll edit this out. No one will ever hear it. But, yeah, you look back at lottery winners over the year, like getting the number 1 pick really matters. And yes, the odds are stacked against you. The Jazz, even if they finish with the worst record, only have a 14% chance of getting number 1 overall.
Yes.
Like, it's not likely. It's just the question is how far are the Jazz going to fall? Not how likely are they to win number 1. How likely are they to fall? And it's an 86% chance. But you put yourself in a spot where if you do get lucky, you do get that number 1 overall pick, you can get an Anthony Edwards. You can get a LeBron James. And I don't think Cooper Flagg is necessarily going to reach either of those guys' heights, but that's what the number 1 overall pick does for you.
Yes. All right, are we taking a break?
Yeah, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get you your mailbag questions. Stick around. More Jazz Notes coming up next. Welcome back to the Jazz Notes podcast. Ben Anderson, Chandler Holt. All right, during the break, we did some research. I was wrong about the Timberwolves. But, okay, so let's just go back quickly since we were talking about where you finish in the lottery odds and where you actually ended up picking or who ended up picking. So we'll start with last year, 2024, the Atlanta Hawks.
Yes.
9th worst odds. They jumped up.
all the way up.
That hurt because the Jazz were ahead of them and out-tanked them late in the season, and then got jumped by them and Brooklyn.
Yes.
By two teams that the Jazz out-tanked late in the season. San Antonio Spurs tied for the second worst. They got Victor Wembanyama. Orlando Magic tied for the second worst. They got Paulo Banchero with the number 1 overall pick. Detroit second worst in 2021. They got Cade Cunningham number 1 overall. And then the Timberwolves in 2020 were the third worst.
Yes.
So the year that they got Anthony Edwards, they were the third worst. Here's the nice thing, though. Outside of Atlanta last year, 3%. The 4 teams previous to that, what were their odds of winning the lottery?
14%.
Which is where the Jazz are going to be.
Yes.
Right? So you are seeing the value of having that 14%. Now, some of these teams were the second worst, 3 teams in a row, actually, the second worst odds, jumped up to number 1 overall. But for the most part, you're not seeing teams with 3%, 4%, 3% last year, like Atlanta outside of the outlier last year, jumping up. And even before that, it was 4 years in a row, outside of when the Pelicans moved up to get Zion Williamson, 4 years in a row, the team with the worst record overall got the number 1 overall pick. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
4 straight years, the team with the worst record, which is why they changed the lottery system. They're like, it's too easy to rig. Minnesota got Cat in 2015 with the worst record. 76ers got Ben Simmons in 2016 with the worst record. The Nets lost Markelle Fultz and should have been Jason Tatum to the Celtics, who traded it then. Danny Ainge traded it to the 76ers. For the number 1 overall pick in 2017. And 2018, the Suns had the worst overall record and got DeAndre Ayton. Yeah. So 4 teams in a row in the late teens or mid-teens did end up with the number 1 overall pick. But again, that was when you got 25% odds for being there, which is why they fixed it.
And being the worst, although we talked about the trends with the worst record and all that, the Jazz can only fall, if they hold their spot, they can only fall as far as 5. And I think that has a lot of value because it increases your odds also, I believe, of falling to 2, 3, or 4.
Yeah.
And then 5 is the lowest you can go. Right. And I'm pretty sure this is like of course you want the number 1 overall pick, but in reality you want like a top 4 pick in this draft.
And you'll have a 52% chance of drafting top 4.
Yes.
So don't go to Tankathon and play the lottery thing because it's going to drop the Jazz to 5 every single time. But, you look at half and half, about 50-50 chance of picking top 4, which I think, and we'll break this down more as we get closer, I promise you. I'm going to do really deep dives on this. But, I think there's 4 really good players. We'll see if Trey Johnson from Texas and Kasparas Yakashonis from Illinois are how big is the drop-off from the top 4 players to those guys? Yep. Or maybe even the top 3 to number 4 at VJ Edgecombe. I don't know how big that gap is because I just haven't watched them enough. Yes. And the tournament's fun to start watching some of these guys and get a taste of it. But anyways, that's just to update you on what we were talking about before the break that I got all wrong. So,
all right, mailbag time.
Let's do it.
Starting with some DM questions from John Ebenezer. How much more efficient would Keontae be if he was able to get to the rim in the half court? Is this something that will get better with experience or a permanent limitation because of his lack of athleticism?
I think it's a strength thing. Yeah. I still think he just gets knocked off his spots because he's just not very strong yet. And he's 21, and I still think he's going to get a lot stronger. So he's actually pretty athletic. Ask, who was it, Jalen Duren, who he dunked on? Who was it?
Yes.
With the Pistons? Yeah. He knows how athletic he is. Keontae's pretty athletic. He's got to get stronger, and he will. These guys, it's funny to look back. I keep going back to different players and looking around the league. It is not uncommon for guys to make big jumps in their 3rd year or their 4th year and see their shooting percentages really climb up and turn into these excellent players. I know we want guys to be good immediately, and some guys are, and there's the Donovan Mitchells of the world. Some guys do take 2, 3, 4 years before they really start to click in and become guys where you're like, oh man, that guy's awesome. Like Jalen Suggs in Orlando, he's not playing right now. They're awful without him. They're awesome with him. He was not good his first 2 years in the league. His 3rd year, he took off, and his shooting really came along, and it figured itself out. So I'm not saying that's guaranteed to happen with these guys, but year 3, year 4, you get stronger. You know what to expect in the NBA. Look at Walker. Walker's 3rd year, he's awesome. First year, he was good. 2nd year, he was bad. 3rd year, he's great. Yep. So I'm recognizing there's a possibility still for that to happen with Keontae, and I think improving his physicality and getting stronger will help him.
I will say another thing that I have talked about with Keontae is just shot selection, and that's something we talked about earlier in the year as well. I think you said that Keontae's first shot of the game is always a 3-pointer, and then it's if he makes it, he's like, oh, I'm hot, and if he misses it, he's like, oh, I need to make one now.
Yeah, right. Neither are good outcomes.
But in reality, he is solid when he gets downhill and goes to the rim, whether it be a floater or he goes straight into the defense. I think that for all of these young players, I don't know about Bryce, probably Bryce as well, but just for all of them, just shot selection is something that will come along with physicality.
Figure out what your 5 spots are from the floor that you shoot from.
Yep.
Figure out what shots to look for. And I think that's why playing with Isaiah has helped Keontae George. Is like, well, I'm getting more corner threes now than I ever did when I had to create shots for others. So now I know that I can expect 2 corner 3-point attempts a game. So let's really work on that, because that's going to make up 25% of my field goal attempts or 20% of my field goal attempts. I need to make sure that I knock that shot down consistently. And then what's the 3 reads I make out of the pick and roll consistently? Is it the floater? Is it getting to the left hand? Whatever it is,
Yep.
Work on those. Instead of like, I want to be good everywhere. It's like, well, you're not. You're not good everywhere right now. So figure out the places that you are really good and where it helps you and maximize that. And that's where he has a chance to continue to improve as a player. Keontae, just pulling up his shooting stats, 0 to 3 feet, so at the rim, 66%. 3 to 10 feet, 43%. 10 to 16 feet, 40%. He drops off a cliff 16 to 3-point range, which is why they don't want anyone taking mid-range shots. He's at 31%. So it's like, never take that.
Yeah.
Get rid of that shot entirely, and then all your 2-point field goals, you're 40% or higher, and your threes now you're at 34%. Like, your effective field goal percentage is going to jump up to 52 at that point, which is very passable.
Yep.
And then get better defense.
Yeah.
Which is everyone's mandate, including Lowry Markkinen.
Yes.
Like, everyone's got to get better on this team defensively.
Another one from John. What's your over-under on number of current Jazz players on the next playoff team? Who would they be if you had to guess?
And he says he's taken this from the Jackpotting Around podcast. So shout out to the other Jazz podcasts out there.
Yes.
Over-under on number of current Jazz players on the next Jazz playoff team. So Walker, Taylor, Cody, and these, of course, these could be wrong. It would be like one of, or Kyle.
Yeah,
I'd put Kyle in that mix. That's
Isaiah
4, and then like one of Isaiah, Bryce, Keontae.
Okay,
So that's like 5.
yeah.
And that's only did he just say young players? Or
Current
players?
Jazz players.
And then like it will be one of John, Colin, or Lowry.
Yeah.
Like at least one of those guys I think would be around. I'd be surprised if all of them are gone. We like to think there's like this mass turnover, and there was between the Donovan Mitchell era and the current era. Teams aren't usually that quick to blow the whole roster up again over and over and over. So at least 5.
Yeah.
And I kind of mentioned the names there, and then probably closer to 6 or 7.
Yeah.
So you have young players. You invest in them. You don't know what these guys are going to be like next year. Still the Jazz don't know. So I don't anticipate them trading everybody just to trade everybody and hit the reset button once again.
I believe that could be a good segue into one of our extra play questions.
Okay.
Yes, from Jazz Time Jones. Over under on the 6 current young guys that will be back for next year. Seems like a few may be moved like Ochai was.
So the 6 young guys are the 3 rookies from this year and the 3 rookies from last year.
Yep.
I mean, Taylor's going to be back,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
His trade value is 0. I would bet at least one of Keontae or Bryce is back.
Yep.
So that's 2. And then I bet you all 3 of the guys from this year.
Yeah.
So I'd say 5.
5.
Yeah. And if you had to throw somebody in as a trade, maybe you lose both Bryce and Keontae, but I'd be surprised.
That makes sense, honestly, because if you think about the trade that Ochai was in, it was Kelly Olynyk and Ochai, a veteran and a young player. So maybe the Jazz do John Collins or Jordan Clarkson, and then one of Bryce and Keontae in a trade.
Right, just to get up to $20 million in the deal, and you get somebody back at that point. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
All
or maybe they're all
speculation.
back,
Yeah.
But I think the Jazz should, if it were up to me, here's the problem for me. If I had invested 2 years in these guys, either behind the scenes I'd have to know that like Bryce is never going to get better defensively or Keontae's never going to get better defensively, so sell now before everyone recognizes that. But the other part of me is like, man, I've invested 2 years in these guys. I'm going to let somebody else get year 3 out of them? What if they do make the jump in year 3, which is not uncommon for guards especially? Okay, then I've blown that up for nothing? Like, that was stupid. It was a bad investment of 2 years for me, unless I know I'm getting back something very solid or a piece that I'm comfortable, just not having that many young guys on the floor, which is possible. Whoever they draft in the top 5 this year is going to get 25 minutes a game at least next season, 30, assuming that they stay healthy. Taylor's going to have to play a lot. I think Cody's going to play a lot. Isaiah probably plays a lot. Flip probably plays a decent amount. If you just say beyond that, there's not enough minutes, and that's why you're trading guys, I understand that. So you get a draft pick and an asset to go down, down the road. That's where I could see you, making moves. But I don't know. I would be hesitant to throw guys in draft picks or throw guys in trades that I've invested 2 years in, hoping that actually pays off a year or 2 down the road, because that certainly does happen. I've got a couple questions on Blue Sky. Can I hit those real quick?
Yeah, of course.
Jake the Lynx, as always, likes to weigh in. He says, how good of a prospect is Cooper Flagg really? What's his comp? I don't know. You hope he's Anthony Edwards?
Yeah.
That's not his comp by any means, but you hope he's that quality of player, the guy who comes in and immediately changes your culture. And, his first year, Anthony Edwards didn't lead them to the playoffs, but they made the conference finals last year, and they're going to make the playoffs again this year, and they're probably the third hottest team in the NBA right now, fourth hottest team in the NBA right now. So they've got a chance to win another playoff series.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you hope you get with the number one overall pick. But comp, I don't know. Better than Mikal Bridges.
Yeah.
I think you hope is kind of a do-it-all wing that can really defend and do a lot. And he says, what are your thoughts on Walker Kessler suddenly shooting more threes? Good. You're not playing for anything right now.
Yeah.
See if he can take 2 a game next year. Not 6 a game. And the nice thing with Walker and his threes right now, Jake, is that he doesn't need them to be a good player.
True.
He's a good player without him. So, whereas I think he came into year 2 thinking like, well, I got to shoot these threes, and if they don't go in, what's my value? It's like, well, you know what you are. You're a really good rebounder. He's becoming an elite rebounder, very good rim protector and shot blocker, and a decent scorer. If you add the 3-point shot, it just adds an extra element to your game that's just gravy. It's just sprinkles on top of the cake, but you've got a great cake already. So what else can he add? So I think that's the nice value there. He doesn't have to add it, where it felt like maybe last year he had to add it. He doesn't have to this year. But yeah, I would, if he takes 2 a game and knocks down 1 every other game, I honestly think that's a good enough risk.
Yeah.
I think, that's only 25%. You hope you get him up to 35%. And he looks pretty comfortable shooting them. It's not like his wind-up is crazy. But, I even watch the Bucks a lot because they're still on national TV a bunch. It's like, man, just having Brook Lopez out there is such an advantage. Just having a guy out there that spaces the floor and can occasionally hit a big 3 is really, really, really a huge plus. So if Walker could add a little bit of that, not to Splash Mountain's, level, but a little bit, I think would be really helpful. I think that'd be beneficial.
From Jimbo Slice. Any idea who's going to replace Dan Roberts? How many hours a week is that job? And would they mind if I'm 10 minutes late a few games a year?
They would mind. I have not heard. I just know that they are going through the process. I thought they were going to do more in-game samples, but I also get that Dan's last year. He doesn't want to be taking a back seat to some young kid who doesn't know it. I've heard the hockey PA announcer would like to do it because, these are part-time jobs. That's the thing. It's 40 nights a year. It's not 150 nights a year for 7 hours where it's legitimately a full-time job. It's a part-time job.
Yeah.
Dan's got another job. He's still doing his other job. He's not retired from his other job. He's a cabinet builder. So if you could maybe do the hockey club and the Jazz, you would have 80 nights at least, and it's a little closer to full-time. But I suspect they go with somebody totally different, would be my guess. But I don't know who that is.
Next up, from Stockton Ashby, would love to hear your thoughts on VJ Edgecombe versus the 2 Rutgers players. Do you think he's 6'5" as listed? Not sure if you have strong opinions one way or another, but is there anything to be said for taking him? Shades of Ant there, it seems like.
And I'd say, shades of Victor Oladipo and some of these other guys. It depends on if he becomes a good ball-in-hand scorer.
Yeah.
The nice thing is he's not a point guard. I actually like that for the Jazz. You've got a lot of guys who want the ball in their hands. I don't think that's what VJ Edgecombe wants. But maybe late in games he can have the ball in his hands and be a difference maker, which is my favorite type of player. I don't need to have the ball all game, but when it matters, a la Dwayne Wade, give me the ball against Baron Davis my rookie year and I'm going to win us a playoff series. That's the real star in my opinion. Anthony Davis doesn't need the ball every possession, or Anthony Edwards, doesn't need the ball every possession, but when the game is on the line, he has the ball and he's still figuring that out, but that's really his value. So I think that's who you hope VJ Edgecombe is. Again, we have to wait till we get to his actual combine measurements. I was watching Baylor's game the other day and specifically watching him walking by the other guards on the 2 teams. And he's noticeably larger. He really is probably 4 inches taller than those guys. And NCAA basketball, as decrepit as it is, isn't getting a bunch of 5'9" guys for the most part in their backcourt. There are a couple. I think Tennessee has a guy who's 5'9" as their starting point guard. It's mind-numbing, but and he's fine. But they generally have 6-foot players.
Yes.
And he looked a lot taller than the other guards. So he might be a legitimate 6'4", 6'5", which is big enough to play that 2-guard position, and then you hope he fills out. But I love everything else he does.
Yeah.
So if he can add some scoring with the ball in his hands, I think he becomes really dynamic, and he's certainly athletic enough to do it. Mark Daniels, quickly on Blue Sky, my last Blue Sky question, says, is it just Lowry that has to play to avoid tanking fines for the NBA, or are other vets also required to play, and are we going to see Lowry and the vets most games going forward.
It is only Lowry who applies specifically to the player participation policy. Like I said, I think it's All-Stars or All-NBA players in the past 3 years. So Lowry just barely ticks that box from his All-Star appearance in 23. So I don't think the Jazz are not required by any policy to play these other veterans. I would imagine you do see Lowry, like you said, that not necessarily on the second night of a back-to-back, which is tonight.
Right.
But other than that, no, the Jazz cannot get fined for sitting other veterans.
But here's the nice thing. Okay, outside of Chicago and the Wizards, can the Jazz play their whole roster against Boston?
Yes.
Sure. I mean, they played most of their roster that was healthy, truly healthy last night against Minnesota. Can you do it against Cleveland?
Yeah.
Can you do it against Memphis?
Probably.
Can you do it against Houston?
Yeah.
Can you do it against Denver?
Yeah.
Can you do it against Houston again?
Yes.
Indiana on the road.
Yeah.
Maybe Atlanta on the road you don't. Last night of a 5-game road trip. Home against Portland, maybe not. Home against OKC.
Yeah.
Second to last game of the season. And at Minnesota. Minnesota might be fighting to get a guaranteed playoff spot that last game of the year.
Yep.
So the games you're probably not playing your full roster are Washington, Chicago tonight, at Charlotte on March 31st, and home against the Trailblazers on April 9th.
Yep.
It's 4 games left. Like, I think that's why the Jazz have actually played this pretty well. You got your $100,000 fine. Most of these games are at home. Like, if you have to play Lowry on the road at Charlotte to avoid getting fined, fine. You play him at Charlotte, one of these games, he plays 25 minutes a night. You're getting blown out in the first quarter, and you say, yeah, didn't make sense to play him in the fourth quarter. We were down by 30, it didn't matter. If that's kind of your goal. But this, I think we're going to see pretty healthy rosters for the most part. Minus games where, like, the other team's really injured. I think the Jazz are going to have healthier rosters than people think. Now, there might be, again, these DNP-CDs just by dressing a player and not playing him, and maybe you'll get a couple of those with Walker or a couple of those with Lowry, but I think for the most part, you can just play your guys and you're still going to lose because you're not as good as these teams late in the season.
18 games left. Do we think the Jazz get, 2, 3 more wins?
It's not 18, right? Isn't it?
14. 14, sorry.
Yeah, 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if it's more than 2 or 3. Again, minus April 11th, OKC, if the Jazz win that game. But if the Jazz are already 2 games up on another team, who cares? The Jazz know they're going to lose their last game of the season at Minnesota.
Yeah.
You're in control of that. You just beat OKC and you say, fine, last home game of the regular season, send fans out on a high note and win that game. Maybe you get a victory there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's 2 or 3.
Yeah.
I think they're going to finish with 18 wins, which is the fewest in franchise history.
Next up from Sam, if the Jazz slip to the 4th, 5th, or 6th pick on lottery night, do you see them trying to move up? Does it depend mostly on which teams end up in the top 3? I think it totally depends on what teams are in the top 3.
Surely, and you're not getting up to number 1. Cooper Flag is going to be untradeable. 4. Dylan Harper might be, but yeah, it depends. I think Houston owns Phoenix's pick. Yeah. So if Houston wins the lottery with Phoenix's pick and jumps up to number 2 and was like, you know what? We don't need Dylan Harper. We've got all of these young guys. And still, I think you just take Dylan Harper. In all honesty, I think you just take him. But let's say they jump up to 3. That's a better example. They jump up to 3 and they say we just don't need Ace Bailey needing 2 years to develop on this team. We're trying to win. We want Lowry Markkanen, who's probably maybe what Ace Bailey turns into if you had kind of a low-end projection, just like a big guy who can shoot. Just give us Lowry, and we'll make that trade. Then, I see the Jazz trading up. But, again, the nice thing is you're probably not going to fall to 6.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be totally off the board. You're only going to be able to fall as far as 5, and you got a 50% chance. And then, most likely as you flip from 5 to 4, because the Jazz are got to have VJ Edgecombe, can't take Trey or Kasparis, and so they move up to 4 in that situation. But they have the ammo to do it. I mean, the Jazz certainly have the pieces to move up if they want to.
All right, we have a totally different vibe question from Kenny and John here. Something totally different from anything we've seen this year. What's our championship parade route going to be? And does SLC code allow me to set up my chairs now to snag a good spot?
I don't think you can.
No.
I think it's 24 hours before parades, if I remember correctly. I don't know historically, do they start at the arena, talk, and then get on the parade? Or does the parade go and then they end somewhere and then they talk?
I want to say it ends at the arena.
The danger at that point is everyone is intoxicated.
Yeah, true.
Including the players.
Yeah.
So that's when you get really loose-lipped.
Yeah.
So I think you talk first and then everyone goes on the parade and enjoys their libations or whatever, and then they go their separate ways after the parade. So you probably start at Delta Center. By that point, they've blown the hole on First South out of the Assault Palace, so you can get through with the new arena rebuild. So they go up First South. So they start outside of like the statues.
Yep.
And like, you celebrate John and Carl for building the franchise. You do your talk there. You go east, up, first, south. You turn on State Street. Even though you might not be able to you might have to go to Main Street there because I don't think they're blowing out that hole from Main Street to State Street. So you go over on Main Street, up 4th South, then you take a right on State. So you're now going south on State Street, and you go over to like 6th North, and that's only like a block or two. And then you cut west, I would suspect, and you go down 6th North, unless that's just the one-way eastbound. I can't remember exactly which one's which. I think 5th South is the westbound one. I just can't remember right now. You know what I mean? But that's how you do it.
Yeah.
And then you circle back to the arena and guys get their cars or get their Ubers and go home.
I was about to say.
But yeah.
Someone's driving them.
Yeah, the bus is driving them. So I think that's the route. Something like that. You make the loop. I don't think you go up the hill upstate to go to the Capitol. I think that's too steep. But fans would love that.
I was about to say.
Yeah, it'd be fun to have it up at the Capitol.
Hike.
Do the loop. Go over to a Memory Grove. Try Gravity Hill. See what works. So anyways.
All right.
Okay.
Tucker Brady. Say we win the lottery and get a top 3 pick. Do we trade away our vets and try to win the lottery again next year? Why or why not? Tucker thinks they should go for the lottery again.
Yeah. It kind of just depends. We've talked about this a little bit, but if Zion Williamson's available and they want him for a song, the Jazz say, great. Cooper Flagg and Zion, 2 Duke kids, number 1 overall pick. Zion's playing out of his mind these last 15 games. It's why why they're winning all these games and why they're not going to have a worse record than the Jazz. And Zion's like, I just hate being in New Orleans and I want to get out of there and I'm going to play hard the next place I go. And that's why I'm showing you this to trade me. You just go for it next year. You just play hard.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just depends on what happens this offseason. And I don't rule anything out. As much as we like to pretend we know what the Jazz are going to do, we don't.
Yeah.
All signs point to not being good again next year, trading away some of these veteran pieces. There's a lot of evidence that that's the move. A lot of evidence has said the Jazz should do X, Y, or Z, and they don't do those things.
Yep.
Shouldn't have drafted 6 players in the last 2 years. But they did. And, Kyle Filipowski shouldn't have been the best player from this last draft class. He might be for the Jazz. He might be better than Isaiah and Cody.
Yep.
Maybe in 3 years, that's totally different. But again, that's what we don't know. And I think the Jazz are comfortable recognizing they don't know. And they can operate with the sense that they need a little bit more time to figure out what they're going to, what this team's going to look like. I have the injury report really quickly for tonight. I just got it. John Collins out, Taylor Hendricks out, KJ Martin out, Colin Sexton out, left ankle injury management, Jaden Springer out, Clarkson questionable, Keontae questionable, Lowry questionable with right ankle soreness. He tweaked his ankle right before the half in yesterday's game.
Okay.
So we'll see. Second night of a back-to-back. If you don't play him tonight, maybe you don't have to play him on Wednesday. Lowry, that is. You just say that ankle's acting up.
True.
So we'll see. Or you dress him and you don't play him.
Yeah.
Which is possible to do as well.
All right, next up from Jonathan. If the Jazz land Cooper Flagg, could that be enough to land a top free agent? I would say probably not in year 1. Like you look at Victor Wembanyama came in, he was absolutely incredible. And then a year later, you have players like De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah, Chris Paul wanted to go there. Or excuse me, De'Aaron Fox wanted to go there. Rich Paul wanted De'Aaron Fox to go there is really what happened.
Yeah.
And placed him there. Chris Paul signed. Chris Paul signed for the minimum.
Yeah.
So, that's probably what you're looking at. Who was the last really good free agent to sign with Nikola Jokic and the Denver Nuggets? Nobody. And Cooper Flagg's not going to be as good as Nikola Jokic.
Yes.
And people would rather live in Denver than Salt Lake in the NBA circles.
Yep.
So no. It's not going to help the Jazz land any free agents.
Yeah.
I hate to burst your bubble. It's not,
Yeah.
Maybe you get, a veteran that would be willing to come in and play, but I just don't think that's what happens. Now, look, Bojan Bogdanovic signed with the Jazz when they had Donovan and Rudy and was a really good signing. And Jeff Green and Ed Davis signed here. And those guys were busts here. Maybe that was Quinn Snyder's fault, but they showed interest in being in Utah, and the Jazz paid them a little bit more than some other teams paid them. I think Jeff Green got the league minimum, but it was like the idea of being on a winning team.
Yeah.
When Joe Johnson signed with the Jazz, they paid him more. That's just what the truth is going to be. You're going to have to pay guys a little bit more to be here. That's fine. Yeah. That's part of the deal. Guys want money, and they're going to go where the money is. So just be willing to play that game. I don't think Cooper Flagg being here, unless he's superstar, is going to encourage guys to land here.
Yeah.
But maybe it's Rich Paul is willing to put a guy in Salt Lake. If he's willing to put his guy, De'Aaron Fox, in San Antonio, which I was told by somebody who would know that was done a year before the trade went down, that Rich Paul had placed De'Aaron Fox in San Antonio a year ago before the trade even happened. Maybe if Cooper's that good, maybe Rich Paul says, well, Salt Lake's a viable option, actually, because my guy can go and win there. maybe that's what helps, and that's better than free agency, I guess.
Yeah.
And Jazz don't have any free agency money.
True.
I mean, they could have $60 million if they waive everybody or trade these expiring contracts, but they didn't trade expiring contracts, so they don't have that much money.
Yep. Next up from Jazz Bear Grylls, I'm interested to see what you think about this one. Thoughts on the foul baiting players around the league and how to fix it.
Call fewer fouls.
Okay.
That's the fix.
Yeah.
Just don't reward guys.
I was going to say.
When Shea gets in front of you and waits for you to crash into him when he jumps, just don't call that foul.
Yeah.
And just say, oh, that wasn't a natural basketball motion. I don't know what to tell you. You had an open lane in front of you and you stopped. We're not calling that anymore. And if you go back and watch the FIBA tournament or watch Court of Gold on Netflix, which is the Olympics documentary, it's like they go and they show it and all the players are like, hey, that's a foul. And they're like, it's FIBA. These are FIBA rules. We're not calling that foul anymore. And the players stop doing it.
Yeah.
So that's the fix. Just tell the refs to stop blowing their whistle.
And that's the thing. Didn't the NBA implement some sort of like you said, non-basketball offensive foul thing with shooters? Like it includes sticking your leg out when you shoot a three and other things?
There's the shooting. There's the sticking your leg out. There's the swipe through move that used to get you free throws. They don't let you get free throws anymore, especially from the 3-point line. There's the jumping into players that they've gotten rid of. So they have eradicated some of it.
Yeah.
The best thing is just say, just don't blow your whistle.
Yeah.
If it looks like a guy is foul baiting, don't blow the whistle for him. And if he's mad about it, fine. Give him a tech.
Yeah.
They will stop doing it. And you just got to lay out the rules. You just got to let them know, like, guys, we're not going to call that foul anymore. We're trying to speed up the game. You're doing unnatural stuff on the court to try and draw fouls. The coming off screen and a guy and pulling up short on somebody. Just don't call that foul anymore.
That's one that I do dislike, the stopping in front of them when they're behind you. But in terms of like mid-range jump shots, I feel like this might be an unpopular opinion, but like if you don't contest Shea, he's going to shoot 80%.
Yeah, he's
from 15 feet.
Basically automatic.
Yeah. So it's like you have to get a hand up, and it's like he is so good that he in a way deserves that call.
Because he's going to make it otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah. But then I say just then make the shot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But
True.
then they foul him so he doesn't make the shot.
Yeah.
So that is the catch-22 of it all.
Yes.
He makes it or you foul him, so you have to guard him. So you foul him and you just get to not reward him for being good.
Yeah.
Like he's good.
Exactly.
I hate the curl off the top of the three over the screen where they pull up short. I watched Donovan do it yesterday. He didn't get called for it. And he was mad about it. It's like, you went into a screening. You went into your shooting motion behind a screen of a 7-footer just so the guy would run into you.
Yep.
It's like the offenses are too good. And maybe what you do is you just, this is a long talked about thing. Get rid of goaltending.
Yeah.
Not goaltending like if the shot's going down, but once the ball hits the rim, let them block the shots. And maybe you still have the free throws and guys get as many free throws as they want, but you give defense something back as well.
Yeah.
And then Walker Kessler's the most valuable player in the NBA. He and Victor, because their ability to block everything really has a ton of value.
If that was a rule, Victor might average like 6 blocks a game.
Yeah, and they might just call it a rebound at that point, but fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And opposing field goal percentages would drop to like 39%.
All right. Next up from my guy Sean. Shout out to Sean. What do you think of the zone defense Will has them play? It feels like every time we make a run, we switch to a zone and the other team eats it up. Obviously good for tanking, but sometimes it drives me crazy.
There are sometimes I think it really works and sometimes it really doesn't work. I think it's to protect the bad defenders on the Jazz team, which is basically everybody. It does kind of force teams to funnel into Walker Kessler, which is a good idea. But also because the Jazz are so bad defensively, it allows, Keontae George or Bryce Sensabaugh or Lauri Markkanen, who are not good defenders, to have a more simplistic system.
Yes.
Guard your zone. Guard your area. Don't worry about back cuts and switches and the shell game and all of that stuff. And then, if the Jazz want to lose a game, go to the zone and let a team bomb a bunch of threes on you and the game's over.
And one thing that's interesting is I think that, of course, the Jazz, as they currently are, they have a bunch of individually bad defenders. So in a defense where you are all one, basically, which is what the concept of a zone is, you're going to be bad because players aren't going to be at the right spot in the right time and they aren't going to move where they're supposed to move. But I think that having that in your back pocket as something that you have practiced and know how to do eventually is going to be good to throw at teams once you are competitive.
And Will also, he said this last week, Will Hardy, he said, sometimes we like to run the zone, not because we necessarily predict it's going to get a stop, but because we know it's going to make them run a different play.
Yeah.
And if a team just gets comfortable knowing that, they can't defend this action at all, which is plentiful for the Jazz, we have to at least do something different because the defense is simply not the same to run the action against. Yep. So we have to run something different just to break up a stride, just to break momentum, and you hope that rattles the offense a little bit. That's some of the theory behind it, is just run a different play than the one you've been running over and over and killing us with. That's some of the concept.
Next up from Dan, USU the right blue. Am I too late? No, you're not, Dan. My question is, where will Lowry rank all-time in Jazz threes if he stays the majority of his career with the Jazz, let's say until 2030? I have the list right here.
Okay, yeah, because he just broke into the top 10 yesterday. You wrote the story.
Yes. Joe Ingles is first all-time with 1,071 threes. Lowry is currently at 512. And honestly, if he stays, I think he easily makes it to number one for that long. That's what the question was, if he stays till 2030. Because you get to sixth just by getting 40 more threes than he currently has.
Right. These numbers are going to be erased really quickly. Donovan Mitchell would have blown past Joe Ingles had he stuck around at all, right? Donovan Mitchell's number 2?
Yes, 958.
He's here for 6 years.
Yeah.
You know, he's, 100 back of Joe Ingles?
Yep.
Yeah, so he's really close, and he just wasn't here very long. So, I mean, Jordan Clarkson, depending on what the last couple of years of his career look like, could get there, right? Where's Jordan?
Jordan's at 817, which is a little more than 200 away from Joe.
So how many threes has he hit this year? I'll pull it up right now. And again, he hasn't played very much this year, but Jordan Clarkson has hit 216 this year.
Yeah.
So if Jordan Clarkson's on the team next year, he'll pass it next year.
Yeah.
Right? So Jordan will be the number one for the Jazz soon. What was the full question? Who by 2030?
Yeah, like
probably
if he
the
stays.
guy the Jazz haven't drafted.
Yeah.
Oh, but Lowry easily will.
Yes.
Yeah, Lowry will get there in 2 years, 3 years. Yeah, that's not going to take long at all.
Yeah.
So guys hit 200 plus a season. Yeah, easily. What does Lowry have this year? And he's having a bad year. You know, Lowry is sloughing a little bit this year. This is not the same Lowry we've seen the last couple of years. When he's really going for it, I mean, he had 200 his first year with the Jazz. He had only 175 last year and 137 so far this season. A year where, I mean, he only played 66 games his first year with the Jazz. A year where they're trying to make the playoffs and he plays 82 games and is like fully locked in. He's going to have 253s?
Yeah.
Something like that. So he could pass it by 2028 pretty easily, assuming he's around.
Yes. Next up, from James McKinney. All signs show that the Jazz are going to tank next year, and I don't see how Markkanen stays, speaking of the devil, unless he really likes it here in Utah. How probable is it that the Jazz hang on to Markkanen long term?
He does really like it here in Utah.
Yes.
He knows what's going on. Like, again, the report came out last week that, like, there was Lowry was told the Jazz would have a timely return to winning basketball. Like, I don't know. And what does timely mean? 3 years? 1 year? It wasn't 1 year. No one thought the Jazz were going to be good this year. They didn't sign any free agents. The only guy they signed was his free agent buddy, Svi Mikhailuk.
Yeah.
Like, that was it. They have the same agent. And they're going to do an autograph signing this weekend. Like, that's it. That's the only... I don't think Lowry was under any misconception that this was going to be a winning year for the Jazz. They didn't do anything to try and win more.
Yeah.
And Lowry knew it right away. So, I mean, Lowry wanted his money. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who asks for a trade. I just don't. I really don't. And so the Jazz kind of can do whatever they want with him. And if they don't feel like they want to pay him $40 million for the next 4 years, then they can trade him. And if they're okay with it, then they just keep him around. But I don't see urgency to trade Lowry, minus he becomes the best player available on the trade market like he was this summer, and a team blows the Jazz away with a trade offer that makes sense, and they get a Cooper flag and want to hit the reset button.
Speaking of which, I think before the last game, so like just before the weekend or on this weekend, there was a bunch of like proposed trade ideas. Was it from Bleacher Report or something featuring the Pistons and Lauri Markkanen, and all of them were awful.
Yeah, one of them was Jaden Ivey, Christian Stewart. Is that his name? Beef Stew. What's Beef Stew's real name?
Isaiah Stewart.
Christian Stewart. Isaiah Stewart. Ron Holland III, you know, who was a lottery pick this year, and like some other salary filler.
And then like one pick, right?
One pick for Lowry and Colin Sexton.
Yeah.
It's like, I get Jaden Ivey had an okay year this year, and it's his third year in the league, looking at guys who had a big jump their third year, which is why I wouldn't totally give up on everybody. Look at Colin Sexton's third year in the league. He averaged 24 points a game on a bad team, too. Now, I get that this was a better Pistons team this year, but the last 2 years, Jaden Ivey was totally underwhelming on two horrendous Pistons teams.
Yeah.
Like, do you think Jaden Ivey's guaranteed to be better than Colin? He might be, but to this point in their careers, if you match them up side by side, nobody would say Jaden Ivey's a better player than Colin Sexton for their first 3 seasons in the NBA. Nobody would. So they're getting Lowry and Colin for that? Yeah, like, that can't be the trade.
No.
Again, I think it's the Houston trade that's been talked about a little bit with Reed Shepherd kind of at the middle of it and Jabari Smith at the middle of it, maybe a Cam Whitmore, and then draft picks.
Yeah.
I could see something like that piquing the Jazz's interest more than just some terrible, here's a okay player coming off a major injury and a couple of role players. Like, Jazz don't need a center. They've got a center. Then you've got Kyle Phillips. But that stuff is always frustrating.
All right, last mailbag question from Josh Chisholm. How would Dylan Harper or VJ Edgecombe fit with Isaiah and Keontae? I'm preparing to be disappointed when we don't get the first pick, but I don't know if we need more guards.
Well, Dylan Harper just replaces both of them.
Yeah.
And they get washed out.
Yes.
He's just way better than they are as prospects. So it's not even the question. There's no question, how does he fit with them? It's how do they fit with him, if you care at all. And then VJ Edgecombe, actually, like we've mentioned, I think is great because he plays next to them.
Yeah.
He plays off of them, and then maybe in the most important situations of the game, he gets the ball a lot more. But he's way more efficient than either of those players. He can be a complimentary ball handler. He's a good three-point shooter, maybe a complimentary playmaker, and then you hope he creates his own shot. Isaiah is still struggling to create his own shot, knowing what to look for. He's had some brief moments of it we've seen, but you haven't seen a ton of it. Keontae can create his own shot and get shots off. He doesn't make them at a high rate. He's becoming a much better playmaker.
Yeah.
But no, Dylan Harper or VJ Edgecombe immediately supplant both Keontae and Isaiah in the pecking order day one.
Yeah.
So you just don't even care about it. And, Ace Bailey does with Flip and Cody and Taylor. Cooper Flagg replaces everybody.
Yes.
Other than honestly maybe Lowry, he replaces them. Everybody is the number one option on offense. Even he's not like big time go-to scoring guy right now. I do think he's going to be a 20-point per game scorer in the NBA,
yes.
and probably relatively quickly, and he's going to really thrive with NBA spacing. But he's going to be a guy you want to touch the ball as much as possible. So everybody shifts back a spot if you get Cooper Flagg, and honestly, everyone might shift back with both Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey because they're big-time offensive players.
The interesting thing with Dylan Harper is he does play a lot with the ball in his hands, but he's also 6'6". So when looking at Isaiah or Keontae, you could try him out at point guard and maybe put Keontae as the 2, or if you want him to play off the ball, you can have Isaiah still run the offense. Yeah. He definitely does go above them in terms of who the Jazz's focus is on, but I think that it doesn't necessarily make both of them useless on the roster.
No, not at all. None of these guys do.
Exactly.
The nice thing is there's no repetition on the Jazz roster.
Yes.
There's not any spot where you're like, oh, that guy doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
The Jazz have actually done a good job drafting guys who can have a little bit of versatility. Now, Isaiah, not so much. He's a point guard, and until he shoots the 3, he can't really do anything other than play point guard. But you can always have high IQ players on the floor.
True.
And he's not a high IQ player. Keontae can play the 1 or the 2, and there's value there. Now, maybe he's not on the roster next year. Yeah. You know what I mean? But Bryce can play the 2 or the 3. Taylor can probably play the 3, the 4, or the 5. Walker can play only the 5, but Walker's your starting center going forward, so you're thrilled with him. And there's no chance you're replacing him unless the Jazz, fall to 3 and then it's 7. The other Duke kid's there, and you probably don't even draft him. So, Cody's going to be able to play multiple positions. Bryce plays a couple of positions. Taylor's going to play a couple of positions. It's just like all these guys will be able to do multiple things and adapt around whoever the Jazz draft. And if they don't adapt, you just move off of them.
Yep.
It's kind of that simple. Whoever the Jazz get this year, they're going to be really, really heavily invested in. Unless they fall to 5, and then it is, Trey Johnson or Kasparis Yakashonis, who I mentioned, who maybe have a little bit less positional versatility.
Yep.
Trey's probably a true 2 complimentary ball handler, but go-to scorer. Kasparis might be able to play 1 and the 2. I don't know. To watch them more.
All right. I think that's it.
Okay. Thanks to everybody who wrote in a long mailbag.
Yes.
But always fun. We appreciate the questions. This is an interesting and exciting time of the season if you're a Jazz fan trying to get ready for the draft because, A, the lottery balls are trending in your favor, and the tournament is there to watch.
Yes.
And so maybe we'll put together a list of guys to watch for the tournament if you're a Jazz fan, and I'll put that out before Thursday. I'll plan on doing that.
And I will add that to the Jazz Notes mailbag. So I better get it done quick. Because
it's tomorrow. The mailbag comes out on Tuesdays. So I'll try and get that out quickly.
If not, though, look out for it on KSLSports.com.
And I'll put it on Twitter. Which way you can find us at Ben's Hoops, at C Holt Sports. Read us at Blue Sky as well. We'll be back with you next week.